When investigating an active compromise, a memory dump is one of the most valuable pieces of evidence that you can collect. Now, I say valuable because in many cases, when someone sees a scary pop up, their immediate reaction is to shut down their computer or restart it. And because memory is so volatile, all of the information that was stored in memory before the reboot or shutdown is now lost. In today's video, I'll be walking you through a lab provided by CyberDefenders called Reveal. In this lab, we'll be analyzing a memory dump from an endpoint that our SIM had flagged with suspicious activity. Let's get started. To get started, you want to head over to cyberdefenders.org and create an account if you haven't done so already. Once you've signed in, head over to CyberRange and click on Practice, and we'll search the lab called Reveal. Let's click into the lab here, and we'll quickly go over the scenario as well. It says, you are a forensic investigator at a financial institution, and your SIM flagged unusual activity on a workstation with access to sensitive financial data. Suspecting a breach, you receive the memory dump from the compromised machine. Your task is to analyze the memory for signs of compromise, trace the anomaly's origin, and assess its scope to contain the incident effectively. If we take a look at the top left corner, it does have a tool recommendation called volatility. And if you aren't aware of what volatility is, we can just highlight this, right-click, and search for Google. Clicking on the volatility foundation here, the second link, we can see that the volatility framework was developed as an open source memory forensics tool written in Python. What this tells me is that volatility is a memory forensics analysis tool. So we can use this tool to analyze our memory dump. However, I am going to be using a different tool called MENTORSHIP. So let me go ahead and search that up. MENTORSHIP. Click on the GitHub link here, scroll down, and it says MENTORSHIP is an easy and convenient way of viewing physical memory as files in a virtual file system. And that is incredible, because if you're familiar with how volatility works, you're essentially working through the command line, aka the CLI. However, with MENTORSHIP, you're essentially mounting that memory dump as a virtual file system, meaning you can traverse your memory dump within your file explorer. It's extremely convenient, and I'll show you here. But before I do that, let's go back over to our CyberDefenders and let's download our lab files. Do keep in mind of the password, which is cyberdefenders.org, all lowercase. Once we finish downloading the lab files, we simply need to right-click the zip, and I'll go over to my 7-zip and extract here. For the password, this is cyberdefenders.org. And while that extracts, go ahead and open up a PowerShell window with administrative privileges. And once we have our PowerShell window opened, let's go ahead and change directories to our desktop or to wherever you downloaded your lab files. I'll type in cd for change directory, and I'll paste in my directory path. And if you're wondering how I got this, what you can do is open up the File Explorer and then click on the search bar. Once you click on it, it will highlight the full file path of where you currently are. Then you can just right-click and copy. And that is what I did here. I'll hit enter, and if I type in dir, I could see my files here. The directory of interest is the 192-reveal, so I'll change into that directory and type in dir one more time. And here is our memory dump called 192-reveal.dmp. Go ahead and clear out the screen. Now that we have our memory dump ready to go, the next step here is to start downloading MENTORSHIP. Head back over to the GitHub here, click on releases, and I'll select the .zip file, and I'll save it to my desktop. Go ahead and right-click your file, 7-zip again, and then I'll extract to the folder. Let's go inside MENTORSHIP, and here is all of the files. Now that we have this installed, let's change into our directory of MENTORSHIP here. And once we're in our directory, all we need to do is call the memprocsf.exe, memprocsf, and I'll hit tab for auto completion. If you go ahead and hit enter, it will show us options that we can use with this executable. And scrolling all the way up, we can also see some examples of how to use it as well. And for this lab, what I'll be using is the -device flag. I'll type in memprocsf again, hit tab for auto completion, and then call the -device flag. And now we want to point it over to our memory dump. Similar to what I did before, I'll click on back, head over to my 192 revealed directory, click on the search bar, right click, and copy. And now paste it in here, hit backslash, type in 192 and tab for auto completion. And now it is pointing directly to my memory dump. I'll hit enter and look at that. It says Python initialization failed. Python 3.6 or later is not found. But if you see that error, that's okay. We can go ahead and ignore that. However, when you take a look at the second one, it says mount failed. The required Dokkanny file system library is not installed. Please download from this link. Let's go ahead and do that. I'll highlight it, right click, open up a new tab and paste that in here. Scroll down and I'll download the Dokkan setup.exe. Save that there and let's go ahead and run it. I agree and install. So that took about 5 seconds to install. Once you see the installation successfully completed, you can go ahead and close out this window. Now that Dokkan's installed, let's go ahead and clear up the screen so it's not too messy. And I'll hit the up arrow key a couple times so I can rerun the same command. And now it looks pretty good. We do get a message saying Microsoft Internet Symbol Store. We can go ahead and click on yes. I do want you to pay attention to the mount point, which is this right here. We can see that our memory dump is mounted on the M drive. If we open up our file explorer, you should see your memory dump mounted as the M drive under your network location. I'll double click this and here we go. We are now traversing the memory dump within your file explorer. That's amazing. Again, if you do have experience with volatility, you'll be doing this all via the command line. Now, this video isn't a deep dive into memproc.fs. However, if you do want something like that, let me know in the comment section down below. With that being said, let's go over to our CyberDefenders and start our question number 1. Question 1 says, identifying the name of the malicious process helps in understanding the nature of the attack. What is the name of the malicious process? Well, if we open up our file explorer, memproc.fs does a great job parsing some of the files and putting them into certain directories. The directory that I typically spend the most time in is the sys directory, as this directory contains pretty much everything about the system itself. And whenever we find something interesting, we can go under the PID directory or the name directory. These are essentially the same. The name actually has the name of the PID, or aka your process identifier, whereas the PID has your PIDs. And for example, if I were to find a suspicious process, I could go under the PID directory and then drill under the PID of interest. Before we actually dig into the questions provided by CyberDefenders, I do want to share with you some of my methodologies of analyzing a memory dump. Now, this will differ between analysts, but for me personally, the first thing that I typically look at is the network connections, and I'll tell you why. Whenever we take a memory dump, do keep in mind that that is the snapshot at that point in time. So what I want to know is if there are any existing outbound connections towards a potential C2, aka command and control server. Now, if you've never done this analysis before, you might be wondering, how do I know if that is a command and control address? And that is a great question. One of the telltale signs that I observe in the field are unusual ports. So for example, outbound ports that are not to port 80 or 443, which is usually HTTP and HTTPS. So if you happen to see any outbound ports to, let's say, 4444, that is unusual and can be suspicious. The second one is seeing processes that are establishing an outbound connection that you typically wouldn't see. For example, if you take a look at your network connections and you happen to see a process of calc.exe, which is your calculator app, establishing an outbound connection to an IP on port 4444, that could be suspicious and you should drill into that. The second thing I take a look at after network connections is the process identifier. So once I find out that, hey, there is an interesting network connection being established, I take a look at that responsible process and then I start digging into that. Are there any command lines that are being used for that particular process? Is there any child process? What is the parent process? And then keep going down that route. Continue to backtrack and create that timeline of events so you can see in a clear picture of what is really happening. Now, I do go over this on my course called the MyDFIR SOC Analyst course, where you can find more information down below. All right, let's get started with answering question number 1. So as per my methodology, I like to take a look at the network connections. And where can we find that using memprocfs? If we drill into the sys directory, we'll find a directory called net, which is right here. And from here, you'll find the output of the netstat command. We have the first one, which is your normal, and then the second one is your verbose. If we click into the normal one, we can see that there is your process identifier, which is in the second column, the protocol, the state, source IP, dest IP, and the responsible process. A pro tip for you, whenever you're taking a look at network connections or your netstat output, what you want to take a look at is the established state. So these are the existing / ongoing network connections that are currently established. And under the dest column, so the destination, this one right here, you want to take a look if there are any unusual ports, which again, those are typically not 443 and 80. So we do have one here that is 8888, and this is under net.exe. So that could be a little suspicious. We do have 443. Now, do note, I'm not telling you to simply ignore 443 and 80, but instead, I want you to focus on ports that aren't 443 and 80 first. Because, hey, a lot of command and control servers are actually using 443 and 80. Just an FYI. But a lot of the low-hanging fruits are ports that aren't 443 and 80. We do see a couple of ports here, and if we look at the process that is responsible for it, it is thunderbird.exe. And this is a mail application, so that looks to be pretty normal for now. We do have MS Edge, which is Microsoft Edge, WWA host, and this is making a outbound connection to these IP addresses here on port 443. We do have our search app and Skype app. What else here? That's about it. Okay, so I do see this net one that seems pretty interesting. What I'll do is copy the IP address, and I'll use an IP reputation tool like Abuse IPDB, and I'll paste that in here. We can see that this was found in their database. It was reported one time. The country is in Finland, and the city is right here. We can see a comment, webdev malware, and 45.9.74.32 at port 8888. That's what we see. And there is a file path here called dav www.root 156.7.dll with entry as the function. Cool. And now let's go back over to our sys directory. Now that I have a process in mind, which is net.exe, we can click on a directory called proc. And we have 3 files here that will contain all of the processes that are currently running at that point in time of when our memory dump was taken. We do have proc, there's the proc time, and proc-v, which is again verbose. And for this one, I'd like to take a look at the verbose for the processes here, because it does provide us with the command line itself, which is extremely important to know. And before I take a look at these processes, there is something I want to mention here. If you take a look at the left-hand side, you will see a dash, and then there's 2 dashes and 2 dashes. You might be wondering, what exactly are these dashes? And what this is essentially the process hierarchy. For example, if you see 1 dash, that is your parent process. If you see 2 dashes, that is the child process of the parent. So we see system with 1 dash, and then we have registry with 2 dashes, SMSS with 2 dashes, and mem compression with 2 dashes. These are all under the process of system. In other words, these are all childs of the parent process system. Now we do have 1 dash here. So that means that this csrss.exe is not the child of system. Again, this is pretty important to know because we do want to keep in mind of the process hierarchy of the suspicious process. Again, just to make sure that we're all on the same page here. Take a look at wininit.exe. It has 1 dash. For services.exe, it has 2 dashes. What this means is that wininit.exe spawned services.exe, which then spawned servicehost.exe. As you can see, it has 3 dashes. Now that we got that out of the way, what I'll do here is hold Control F and I'll search for my net.exe. Because remember, that was kind of suspicious, right? It was making an outbound connection towards an IP address on port 8888, which is an unusual port. And again, an unusual port is not port 80 or 443. If we take a look at the net.exe, it has 2 dashes. That means it is a child process of something. And what is that something? Well, if we take a look at right above it, we do have PowerShell.exe with 1 dash. This is going to be interesting. At the right, we do have our process ID, and we do have the parent process ID. We have the user, which is Elon, and finally, we have the command line output. We can see that it is running PowerShell.exe - Windows style hidden net use. And hey, this looks pretty familiar to what we saw earlier from Abuse IPDB, right? 2 backslashes, the IP address at port 8888, and to this file with 1567.dll and this entry function name. Taking a look at our command line, it is going to that same path, and it has a run DLL 32, so it's executing something, pointing towards our DLL of 3435.dll with the same entry function. Highly suspicious. And then what that did was spawned net.exe, which makes sense because it did use net use. I wonder if there's any processes for run DLL 32 under our PowerShell.exe here. And so far, it does not look like it. What this means is that we don't know for sure if run DLL executed or not, because we can't really tell with this memory dump. Remember, a memory dump is that point in time. So it is always a possibility that the run DLL spawned after the memory dump. Going back over to our question number 1, what is the name of the malicious process? Now again, remember we did observe net.exe making that outbound connection. However, it was a child process of the parent process of PowerShell.exe. What that means is that the malicious process is likely PowerShell.exe. I'll hit submit, and that is correct. Knowing the parent process ID, aka the PPID, of the malicious process aids in tracing the process hierarchy and understanding the attack flow. What is the parent process ID of the malicious process? Well, that we know. Let's take a look here. 3692 is the process ID. 4120 is the parent process ID. And how do I know that? Well, scroll all the way up and take a look at the column. We have PID and parent. 4120. Let's take a look at what process that is. I'll hold Control F, type in 4120, and we can't find it here. So what I'll do is go back over to the directory, head over to my memproc.fs root directory, go into PID, and do we see it here? 4120. I do not see 4120, I do see 4164, but that's not the process I want. What this tells me is that the process ID of 4120 likely exited, but that's okay. We do know the answer for this one, which again is 4120. Scrolling down, question number 3. Determining the file name used by the malware for executing the second stage payload is crucial for identifying subsequent malicious activities. What is the file name that the malware uses to execute the second stage payload? That was our DLL file. If we go back over to my process verbose output here, it used PowerShell to try and retrieve and execute the 3435.dll file. And that is going to be our answer to question number 3. Question number 4. Identifying the shared directory on the remote server helps trace the resources targeted by the attacker. What is the name of the shared directory being accessed on the remote server? This is the directory where we saw the attacker retrieving the 3435.dll file. Again, going back over to my process output, take a look at the directory right before it. We do have dav www root. That is going to be question number 4's answer, I believe. Yes, it is. Question number 5. What is the MITRE ATT&CK subtechnique ID that describes the execution of a second stage payload using a Windows utility to run the malicious file? The Windows utility that was used to run the malicious file was rundll32. And to find this answer, there are a couple of ways that you can do this, but what I'll do here is go over to MITRE ATT&CK and I'll search for rundll32. We can see system binary process execution, run DLL32 with subtechnique of T1218.011. And that is going to be our answer. T1218.011. Perfect. Question number 6, our second last question. Identifying the username under which the malicious process runs helps in assessing the compromised account and its potential impact. What is the username that the malicious process runs under? Going back over to our process output, we do have a user called Elon, and that is our answer. Lastly, question number 7, knowing the name of the malware family is essential for correlating the attack with known threats and developing appropriate defenses. What is the name of the malware family? This is a great question. Now, we do have an indicator of compromise, aka an IOC that we observed, and that is our IP address of 45.9.74.32. To find the malware family, we can use a site like VirusTotal. Head over to virustotal.com, click on search, and let's paste in our IP address. We do see 14 vendors flagging this as malicious as of recording. If we take a look at the bottom here though, we do see activity related to Strela Stealer. Ooh. Strela Stealer is actively stealing email account credentials from Outlook and Thunderbird. Okay. So this is likely our malware family name. I'll click on copy and let's paste that in here. Click on submit, and just like that, we completed the lab reveal. Memory analysis can be a bit overwhelming, and I'll be honest, even I don't know what I'm looking at sometimes. But hey, that is where research and practice comes into play. As an FYI, a junior SOC analyst is not going to be expected to know how to analyze a memory dump. But it is always a good idea to get ahead of the curve and have some exposure to memory analysis. That way, if and when the time is right, you can talk more about it with your potential employer. That is it for the video, and I hope that you found that informative. If you did, let me know by hitting that like button and subscribe if you want to. Remember to stay curious and do things differently.